Welcome to As Long as the River Flows, a Keepers of the Water podcast. Episode 35 is the final part in a 4-part series on the criminalization of Indigenous land defenders in Canada, Our Truth. In part 4, we hear from Francis Mahon and Erin Riley-Oettl. We start off with Francis Mahon. Francis is a constitutional and criminal lawyer and a fierce litigator. The core of her practice is defending people against serious allegations in a variety of settings, including complex criminal trials and appeals, police investigations, and constitutional government overreach. Francis provides legal services to individuals, families, nonprofits, companies, and other organizations. She has appeared in courts and tribunals across the country, including frequent appearances at the Supreme Court of Canada.
I am the defense lawyer for Slido and Shaylin. I've been working in solidarity with members of the Wet'suwet'en Nation and the Gitxsan Nation and other Indigenous nations for quite a long time. I have been very privileged and honored not just to work as a lawyer in solidarity with the nations, but to be educated about Wet'suwet'en and Gitxsan law. I'm very grateful to the hereditary chiefs of both nations to take me out to the Yintah and to give me their teachings that have gone back thousands of years and educate me about the governance structure. It's been one of the greatest honors of my life. I want to go back first to the Delgamuukw court case, and my observations have been that the Wet'suwet'en and Gitxsan people have such incredible pride about the accomplishments that they had despite the many barriers to working within a colonial legal system. But at the same time that case was going through the British Columbia courts and up to the Supreme Court of Canada, we also saw this growth in British Columbia of extractive industries using injunctions, which is a form of civil law, to criminalize Indigenous people and their allies who were attempting to uphold their sovereignty and their own laws. An injunction is meant to be a tool of the civil law. It was never really meant or thought to be a tool to actually criminalize people. But since the early 80s, we've seen this dramatic increase, both for the Wet'suwet'en, also for the Secwepemc, and the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish nations for the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And what the injunction has become is a very, very blunt tool. And it's being used to force these proud nations into compliance with colonial law, quite unsuccessfully, I might add. And we have, and one of my goals has been not only to learn as much as I can, but to attempt to educate our courts and the judges that we're appearing in front of about the proud history of the nations, their language, the land, and their governance structures. And I do think we've had some success in that regard. We've also been able to target the racist actions of the Kurg, known as the Crew, but we've been unable to actually use the Anaknoten or Wet'suwet'en law to defend people against the imposition of criminal law onto them. So on the one hand, we see this acceptance through the Delgamuukw court case, this recognition of longstanding sovereignty and title and governance. But on the other hand, the inability of the Wet'suwet'en and the Gitxsan to use that law to uphold that sovereignty and to enforce the ancient law of trespass on their territories. That only, unfortunately, becomes relevant after people have been convicted of crimes and are being sentenced. And the expression I think of is that this is the tail wagging the dog. Because if we refuse to understand those laws and to apply those laws at the front end, what is the point of doing it at the back end? We use it in order to reduce the punishment that Indigenous people would face. But why do we not rely on it to eliminate that criminalization for upholding sovereignty and for upholding the law? So all we can do and all we've really been able to accomplish is to act as that buffer, as Slido said. We've had mostly success at doing that. But also this education piece, because although the courts refuse and in their views can't rely on Indigenous law to prevent this criminalization. Nonetheless, I've seen this increasing willingness by judges to at least recognize it and incorporate it and just into their behavior into the courtroom. So the judge that we've been appearing in front of, for example, we've seen this progression where he started actually using Wet'suwet'en language, using the proper names of the hereditary chiefs, referring to the sacred river, the Wet'suwet'en, by its actual Wet'suwet'en name. And so this kind of education, while it's not having much impact right now for Slato and Shaylin's court case, that is going to continue on into the future. And so I think that has been one of the successes that we've had. I'll now speak a little bit about where we're at with the court cases. I'll start with Slato and Shaylin's case. So they were both arrested in November 2021. That was the time that I got involved to work in Solidarity. It's been a very, very long time since then. And I really want to echo what Shaylin said in particular about how draining it's been for the people that have had to sit in court, to watch videos of their violent arrest, and to re-experience that trauma in order to defend themselves. It's horrible. It's horrible for me, and I didn't actually live through those events on the ground. So where we're at now is Slato and Shaylin were found guilty of criminal contempt in January of 2024. And at that time, we brought an application to actually stop the proceedings against them because of the violent and racist misconduct by the special arm of the RCMP. And we did have some success with that. We got a decision just this past February where the judge acknowledged that the police had broken the laws that are part of the Canadian Constitution, specifically because of racist language that was used towards Slato and Shaylin in particular, and a violent attack on the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. For the symbols that they were wearing proudly on the day that they were arrested. Now, where we're at is we're moving on to the sentencing process, or the tail wagging the dog process. That will happen October 15th, 16th, and 17th on Gitumden territory in Smithers, British Columbia. I really encourage anybody who's in the area or is able to travel to actually come up and to witness that. The other case that's been happening simultaneously is, and Slato referred to this briefly earlier, is Chief Zahale, who's a hereditary chief for the Laksamshu clan. He was arrested in October 2021 for enforcing the law of trespass on his territory. He used as his defense that he was relying on Wet'suwet'en law, and specifically the law of trespass, and should not be criminalized for that reason. The judge rejected that defense, and there's many other court decisions involving many other Indigenous nations that have taken that same principle. We have filed an appeal of that decision, and that appeal will be heard here in Vancouver on October 22nd of this fall. So again, I encourage you, if you're here, everybody can come to court and actually watch it. Again, this is going to be an opportunity for me to educate the judges just about what Wet'suwet'en law is, how the hereditary chief governance structure works, and how the feast hall governance structure works as well. And also just to impress upon these judges that this is not just some sideline to Canadian colonial law. This is law that has been here long, long before the settlers like my own ancestors. So I'm looking forward to that. And I will continue to be that buffer between my wonderful clients and the colonial law. And sometimes I express that as a movement lawyer as being the hammer in the fist of my clients, because that's really what I can do, is take direction from the nations that I am supporting and translating that into language that the courts hopefully one day will be able to accept.
Thank you, Frances. We now pick up with Erin Riley-Oettl, a lawyer with Amnesty International Canada. Amnesty International is a global movement of more than 10 million people who are committed to creating a future where human rights are enjoyed by everyone. No government is beyond scrutiny. Amnesty International uncovers the truth and holds human right violators to account.
Thank you for having me in this space today. I am here from Amnesty International, our Canada branch, in our English-speaking section. I'm based in Toronto. I've had the tremendous honor to get to know and hear many stories from our panelists, and I'm very grateful that you've invited me into this space. And I'm grateful that I've been able to get to know the Yinta and drink from the Wasinqua and get to know the stories, and that you've welcomed me so much into your land, into your community, to be able to be a partner. So Amnesty International is an international organization, but also a global movement of over 10 million people in 170 countries. We have branches in different countries, like our branch, that look at human rights issues being faced by any individuals that are in that border. So ours is the so-called Canada branch, where we look at human rights issues that are being faced by people who are impacted by Canadian government decisions, provincial government decisions, or any impacted individuals within the land. So we've been able to, we work in a human rights framework. The basis of our work is that we are working towards a world where everyone enjoys the rights that's in the United Nations Declaration for Human Rights, but also other human rights instruments like UNDRIP, which is the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People, which includes the right of self-determination. So we use the international rights, especially as a framework, and it's especially helpful when the Canadian government or other governments are not abiding by their own laws. And we have these international laws that when the laws of the country are unfair, we can rely on the international law and customary law of the international community that Canada has signed on to, which they are bound to and bound by. So we use that as a larger framework in addition to the laws of Canada, and show where Canada might be breaching their national and international obligations. So with self-determination, that is located in all declarations in the first article. It's the right to self-govern, the right to make decisions about the land. It's the right to have free, prior, informed consent over activities that impact life, the land, the water, cultural activities, any life impact that is going to happen on the land. Indigenous people have the right to have free, prior, and informed consent. So we've engaged in a collaborative recording of events, otherwise in a colonial term called a research report, with the Wet'suwet'en people in 2023. And we did that so that we can share and speak as one voice and say, Amnesty has been there, Amnesty can say, along with these voices, that this is what's happening in Canada. So we demonstrated how Canada and BC governments did not uphold international law or Canadian law in obtaining the proper consent from Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs, which had resulted in unlawful injunctions, militarization, and criminalization of folks on their own land. We shared the stories in the report about the unlawful injunctions, the brutal militarization, and used an international law framework to show how Canada is failing its obligations legally. And then we take that and use it as an advocacy tool. So we advocate to the BC and federal government for changes in the way economic development projects are being approved, and to recognize, as BC courts recently have, that there is systemic discrimination against Indigenous people that's inherent in policing systems, which has to be recognized, which has to be addressed, and has to be removed. It's crucial to us as an ally to recognize Indigenous people should not be fighting on their own and should not be fighting for the protection of their land on their own, and should not be the only shareholders of the knowledge of their experience of colonialism. And it's the responsibility of the rest of us to learn, to share that knowledge, to hold it together, and to act together. And we need to act as well and be allies and stand firm. So what we've done as Amnesty, we've shared the story of the Yinta and what is happening, the criminalization through our Right for Rights campaign, which is a letter campaign that's global, and to ask the world to pay attention. Please pay attention to what's happening. Canada has this reputation. It's lovely. Canada must enjoy it so very much in the world that they abide by human rights. They're a human rights advocate. They're a strong human rights country. But that's not the reality of what's happening here. And a lot of people around the world don't know that. And so sharing the story and having Chief Nawaks and Slato and Shay and everyone share their stories with the rest of the world, we were able to say, look at what's happening. This is Canada's reality. This is the reality of how they treat people here. And it's also the reality of how they treat people abroad, because Canada has companies abroad that are impacting Indigenous people in a staggering way. And Canada has a responsibility for companies that are within its borders, for how it acts with its own police, but also beyond its borders to Indigenous people around the world. So over 26,000 people wrote letters of solidarity to Wet'suwet'en people to say, we heard your story, we hear you, and also wrote 600,000 letters directly to Premier Eby to ask them to stop criminalizing. So what can we do? We have lots of forms to write directly to Premier Eby if you'd like on our website. You can download a petition. We'll give you all the language. You can send a letter directly there if you would like. Share the report, share the Yinta documentary with others. Tell why it's important. Tell your government that the criminalization of Indigenous people is not acceptable. When we're looking at the next chapter, the sentencing is in the fall. Amnesty International designated Chief Sahel as the first ever prisoner of conscience. For Amnesty International, we will make a lot of noise, and we'll do it again. We will make a lot of noise to say it is not okay to criminalize individuals and hold them in their house or in jail, either house arrest or jail time, solely for political, religious, or consciously held beliefs or an unchangeable characteristic about themselves. They have not used violence, and they are being detained, and it's unlawful. And so we hope that there's no need, but if it happens again in the fall, where anyone has house arrest or jail time, then we're prepared to also declare prisoners of conscience again. As we look to the new federal government, it's a good time to be vocal, especially to this new government who is making, on one hand, statements about how Indigenous people will be respected, but also on the other hand, about really, really fast economic development and national projects. So this is a good time to be very vocal to the federal government, to have several asks. One, that there is no economic development, no resource extraction at the expense of human rights, at the expense of Indigenous people's consent, and at the expense of their obligations under human rights, under international law, to have proper consent from Indigenous people. Also, recognize Indigenous legal systems. Recognize self-determination fully with Indigenous governance and Indigenous legal systems at a time where it's crucial, where they want to have economic development. Tell the PM, tell the Prime Minister's office loudly, tell your federal government, tell your provincial government very, very loudly. If you want help in how to do that, shoot us a message. We are always available. And on our website, we have letters that you can download to send the messages right away. So it's important that allies please learn and please act. And that's what I would say. And thank you very much for having me here.
That was Erin Riley-Oettl. Thank you for listening. To find out more about Keepers of the Water or to help the cause, visit our website at keepersofthewater.ca. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to be the first to hear new episodes. Make sure to follow us on social media, like our Facebook page, or subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content. Miigwech.